Hand it over, sweetheart. The folder. Slow. I've heard every story that's ever tried to walk through this gate, and yours has about 30 seconds left to be interesting. The man behind the counter, inside the inner gate shack, was wide across the shoulders and lit by the kind of fluorescent overhead that makes everyone look like they need a sandwich. His name tape read Foster. The blue camis were pressed tight at the seams. The voice had the cadence of someone who told people to step back 20 times a day and enjoyed maybe half of those. The woman across from him did not step back. She did not raise a voice. She held a slim manila folder against the lower button of her plain navy blazer and waited, the way somebody waits at a bus stop in the rain when there are no other options. She was black, mid-30s, hair pulled back in a tight knot at the base of her neck, no jewelry, no perfume, no name tape. Her name was Delilah Ashbrook, but the man across from her did not know that yet and would not know it the way it mattered for another 46 seconds. From a pole-mounted speaker outside the shack, the advisory loop played at low volume. Attention all visitors, Joint Expeditionary Base access requires sponsor verification under Base Instruction 5530.14. Unverified visitors will be escorted to the Visitor Control Center for processing. Her lips moved with it, 3 words behind, the way you mouth a song you have heard too many times to forget the order of the lines. Foster watched her do it and decided he did not like that either. You think reading the wall makes you somebody? Folder, now. She did not move. The advisory loop began its cycle again. If you have ever walked into a room where no one expected you to belong, stay with this story and hit the like button before we go any further, because the calm in this woman's shoulders right now, that quiet, that small folder she will not let go of, all of it was earned, and the man on the other side of that counter is about to learn what is inside it.
18 hours earlier, the same woman had been standing at a baggage carousel in Norfolk International Airport, watching a black soft-shell suitcase make its 3rd loop without anyone reaching for it. Hers, in the end, by elimination. She lifted it off the belt without strain, the way someone lifts a thing they have packed and unpacked 100 times, and she walked out into the late spring air with the suitcase in her left hand and the manila folder under her right arm. The folder did not look like anything. Tan, broken corners, a small adhesive label on the upper edge with a typed line and 3 letters at the end she had blacked out herself with a felt-tip marker before she got on the plane. She had carried it through 2 security screenings without anyone looking twice, which was the entire point. She took a ride share to a chain hotel 2 blocks off Atlantic Avenue. The driver tried to make small talk about the weather. She gave him the polite minimum, a small smile in the rear view, 2 short answers, a thank you at the door. He drove away thinking she was a quiet one. He had no idea what kind of quiet. In the hotel room, she unpacked the way she always unpacked. Blazer on the hanger first, smoothed at the shoulders, 2 button-down shirts to the left of it, 1 charcoal, 1 white. Black slacks folded once across the hanger bar, socks balled by pair into the top drawer, smallest to largest, toiletries in a single line on the bathroom counter, toothpaste at the right hand because that was the hand she would reach with, watch on the nightstand, phone on the watch, the folder on top of the phone, square to the corner of the table. Then she stood in the middle of the room and breathed once, in for 4, out for 6, the way she had learned to do somewhere a long time ago. The trip was officially underway. She did not turn on the television. She did not open the curtain. She sat in the wingback chair by the window for a while, the way people sit at gravesides before the dirt is replaced, and she thought about Mason Albert. The lieutenant had been 28 when they met, 33 when they had stopped being able to call each other. He had laughed easily and made decisions slowly, which was an unusual combination in the kind of work he did. And the work he did was the work she did, although nobody at this memorial would say so out loud. The reception program would not list a unit, The chaplain would not list a unit. The flag presented to his mother would be folded the same way it would have been folded if Mason had been a clerk. That was part of the contract. She fell asleep at 10 p.m. and woke at 5:40 without an alarm, which she did not need.
The base visitor center sat just off Shore Drive, a small concrete building with a flag in front and the glass door that did not quite close on its own. She arrived at 6:30 in the morning, before the line started, because she had been told the line started at 7, and she liked margin. The sponsor letter from the Naval Special Warfare Staff Office, the memorial program with Lieutenant Mason Albert's name on the front in matte silver, the printed travel orders with the routing stamps, all of it slid across the counter, all of it accepted without comment, all of it returned with a paper pass clipped to a lanyard and a courteous nod from the petty officer behind the glass. The petty officer's nod was the warmest interaction she would have all morning. She drove the rental sedan back to the hotel to wait for the reception. The drive took 11 minutes. She used 5 of them at a red light to read, twice, the official memorial program pamphlet. Mason Albert, Lieutenant, United States Navy, born 1988, died on duty 2025, survived by parents in Spokane, Washington, and a younger sister in Tacoma. There was no service designation on the printed line. There would not be. The community to which Mason had belonged did not put its work on memorial programs. She folded the pamphlet in half, then in half again, and slid it into the inside pocket of the blazer hanging beside her in the passenger seat. At the hotel coffee bar, while she waited for a black coffee with no sugar, a woman in a cream cashmere wrap and a single strand of pearls leaned across the marble counter and asked the barista in a voice loud enough to carry across 3 bar stools whether the dress code at the base reception still meant something these days or whether they were letting everyone in now. The barista pretended to be very busy with the milk steamer. Delilah accepted her coffee, paid in exact change, and walked out without looking at the woman in the wrap. The woman in the wrap watched her go and smiled, the smile of someone who had said the right thing in the wrong room and gotten away with it. Her name was Charlotte Frazier. She did not know Delilah's name. By the end of the weekend, she would wish she had never asked the question.
The memorial reception was held in the base community center at 10 a.m. on Saturday. The room held maybe 80 people. A few flag officers and undressed blues, a cluster of Mason Albert's former teammates in civilian clothes that fit too well across the chest, parents from out of town wearing nameplates printed by a kind enlisted volunteer at the door, 3 chaplains who knew when to be present and when to step back, and a contingent of senior officers' spouses arranged in the precise, polite half-circle that such groups always form near the better window. There were small glasses of sparkling water on linen-covered tables. There were folded programs beside a large framed portrait of Mason in dress uniform, his cover tucked under the elbow, the half-smile that the photographer had earned the hard way. Delilah stood near the back wall for the first 20 minutes, holding a glass of water she did not drink. She nodded to 2 men who had served with Mason on his second deployment, men she had not seen in 4 years. They nodded back. Nobody said her billet. Nobody named her unit. The men knew better. She knew better. A retired Vice Admiral named Raymond Kingsley was in the center of the room, 3 glasses into an open bar that was supposed to have been a single complimentary drink, surrounded by his old peers and a thinner ring of younger officers who had not yet learned to drift out of the gravity well of senior men telling stories about themselves. He told 2 stories about Mason that were largely true. He told a 3rd story that was mostly about himself. He saw, across the room, a woman in a plain navy blazer he did not recognize, a woman who did not laugh at the right moments and did not lean in when the senior man spoke, and he decided, in the loose, generous way that drink decides things, that he was going to fix that. He waved her over with 2 fingers, the way you wave a server. She did not see the gesture. He waved harder. The cluster around him noticed and began to turn. By the time Delilah had finished her sentence to the chaplain she was speaking to, the room had partly rearranged itself around the Admiral's curiosity, the way a tide rearranges sand without asking the sand. "You there, Navy blazer, come here a minute. The boys want to play a game." She crossed the room without hurrying. She stopped 2 arm lengths away, not 1, which was the first thing Senior Chief Silas Arden noticed from where he was standing near the portrait. Arden, retired, the man who had buried Mason and then come home and stopped sleeping much, noticed everything that morning, but he noticed that first. The Admiral did not notice it at all. "So what are you, sweetheart? Lieutenant of the laundry pool? Captain of the catering staff? Give the boys a laugh. We're doing introductions." The cluster laughed. Not all of them, most of them. Charlotte Fraser, who had drifted closer when she saw who had been waved over, laughed the loudest, with the small private satisfaction of someone whose coffee bar comment had just been validated by a flag officer. A man at the back of the cluster did not laugh, a chief petty officer named Connor Royd, who was already running the math on his phone, screenshotting names from the memorial guest list, building a case in the way people who decided to do a thing build it before they admit to themselves what they have decided. The woman in the blazer waited until the laughter finished. She let it run all the way out, which made some of the laughers cough into their water glasses. Then she said, evenly, the way she always said things, that her name was Ashbrook, that she had served with Lieutenant Albert on his last deployment in 2023, that she was here at the family's request, and that she would be happy to step away if her presence was a distraction. She did not give a rank, she did not give a unit, she gave the smallest true thing she could give. The Admiral's smile flickered for half a beat, then reasserted itself. "On his deployment, in what capacity exactly?" "In a supporting capacity, sir." "Supporting," he repeated, slow, tasting the word. "Right, supporting, of course."
Charlotte Fraser leaned in then, with the practiced grace of a woman who had been rescuing senior officers from their own dialogue at parties since the early 90s. She placed a hand lightly on Kingsley's sleeve and said, in a tone pitched for the surrounding ring to hear, that she was sure the young woman did not want to embarrass herself further, and that perhaps everyone could return to the lovely portrait of dear Lieutenant Albert, which was, after all, why they had gathered. The cluster nodded along. The Admiral allowed himself to be steered. The half-circle reformed around him without Delilah in it. She stood for a second in the empty space the cluster had left behind. She did not look at the chaplain, and she avoided Silas Arden's gaze from the side wall, where his expression contained too much understanding and not enough surprise. She set her water glass down on the long table beside the portrait, square to the edge, and she walked out of the community center by the side door, because the side door was closer, and she did not want to walk the length of the room twice. Outside, the air off the bay had the metallic flat smell that the Virginia coast has in late spring, salt and diesel and asphalt warming under the sun. She walked to the rental car with her hands in the blazer pockets and her face composed. She got into the driver's seat. She closed the door. She put both hands on the wheel and counted in for 4 and out for 6, and did that twice. And then she drove back to the hotel and did not cry, because she had not cried at things larger than this one, and she was not going to start with the Admiral. Inside the community center while she was driving, Connor Royd stood near the bar with his phone tilted slightly toward his chest and a thumb moving fast across the screen. He drafted an email in the Navy Ombudsman intake form. He cited Title 18, United States Code, Section 704, the Stolen Valor Act. He selected the option that allowed the report to be submitted anonymously.
He attached one screenshot of the memorial guest list with Delilah Ashbrook's name highlighted, and a second screenshot, taken from across the room 30 minutes earlier, of the woman in the navy blazer accepting a handshake from one of Mason Albert's former teammates. He typed in the free text field the phrase, "claims unspecified service alongside Lieutenant Albert, no verifiable affiliation, recommend look into." He hit send. He put the phone in his pocket. He took a long swallow of his drink and turned back to the room with the easy expression of a man who had simply gotten a notification and dealt with it. The Admiral across the room said something that made Charlotte Fraser laugh again. Royd raised his glass to no one in particular. He had done his civic duty. He thought of it exactly that way. What Royd did not check, because he never checked, was that the work device in his pocket was still signed in to his official account. The anonymous filing was anonymous on the front of the form. On the back end, where Audrey Forrester would eventually be reading, it had a device identifier on every line. By 7 the next morning, the senior spouse group text was already on its third subthread. Charlotte Fraser had drafted the opening message the night before, polished it twice, and pressed send at 6:45 with the specific timing of someone who knew when the other women in her circle picked up their phones for the first time. The message did not name Delilah Ashbrook. It did not need to. It described a young woman at the reception who had presented herself as having served with Lieutenant Albert and whose claims, in Charlotte's careful phrasing, deserved gentle scrutiny so as not to dishonor the family. The word gentle did all the work. By 8, 3 of the recipients had forwarded the message to other recipients. By 9, in the version that was now circulating most widely, Delilah Ashbrook had become a contractor who had pretended to be a SEAL widow to attend the reception unchecked. She heard nothing of it. She drank her coffee at the hotel window with the program pamphlet open beside her, looking out at the boardwalk and the gray sweep of water beyond it. Her phone buzzed at 9:14 with a text from a number she did not recognize, area code 757, an unfamiliar carrier prefix. The text was 3 sentences and signed only Anderson, JAG. It asked, in the courteous and obviously practiced phrasing of a Navy attorney, whether she might be willing to come by the JAG Annex at 11 a.m. to discuss a small administrative matter that had been brought to his attention. He said the meeting would be informal. He said the meeting was at her convenience. She set the phone down. She read the text again. She read it a third time. She did not answer for 2 minutes. Then she replied that she would arrive at 10:43, that she would not be bringing counsel, and that she looked forward to clearing up whatever the matter was. She did not bring counsel because she did not need counsel. She brought the folder because the folder went where she went. She did not tell Anderson about the folder. He would not have asked. She arrived at 10:43. She parked in the visitor lot. She did not adjust the rearview mirror to check her face. She walked across the parking lot with the folder under her right arm and the lanyard pass clipped to the lower edge of her blazer, where Foster would later, in a moment that had not happened yet, refuse to acknowledge it. She did not know about Foster yet. She had 18 minutes to herself before the day began turning. She used 3 of them at the door, reading, again, the posted base instruction notice on the wall by the entrance. 5530.14, Visitor Access, Sponsor Verification Procedures, Required Identification, Authorized Exceptions. She read it the way someone studies a map of a building she is about to enter at night. Lieutenant Commander Derek Anderson was 36 and bookish and not unkind, and he held the door open for her with the easy, automatic politeness of a man who'd been told repeatedly in his career that small civility costs nothing. His office was small and tidy. There was a framed degree from a law school in upstate New York. There was a coffee mug that read Procedure First. There was, on the corner of the desk, a single thin file folder with a tab he had not yet labeled. He invited her to sit. She sat. He explained, in the manner of someone who had given this opening speech many times, that a concern had been raised, that the office took such concern seriously, regardless of source, that he was speaking with her today on an informal basis, and that nothing she said would be on the record. He said the word informal twice. She heard it twice. She knew, because she had been on the other side of conversations like this one in another life, that the word informal was load-bearing, and that load-bearing words usually carried more than they admitted. He asked if she could clarify her affiliation with Lieutenant Albert. She said she had served alongside him in 2023. He asked in what capacity. She said in a supporting capacity. He smiled the small, careful smile of a man who had heard that phrase before and knew it was a wall. He asked if she would be willing, voluntarily, to provide identification confirming her billet, simply to allow him to close the inquiry the same morning it had opened. He said it would be the quickest path through. He used the phrase quickest path through twice. She said, evenly, that she would prefer the inquiry be routed through the proper office of record, and that she would respond fully and promptly through that channel. She said it without heat. She said it the way you decline a second cup of coffee. She did not cite anything. She did not need to. She did, however, quietly observe to herself that what Anderson was asking her to do, walking a federal officer into producing classified credentials in an informal forum, without the receiving channel being lawfully designated, would itself, if it ever surfaced, look quite a lot like conduct unbecoming under Article 133 of the Uniform Code. And she did not raise that point with him because she had not yet decided whether he was a man who would understand it as a courtesy or as a threat. Anderson nodded. He kept nodding for a beat too long, which is what nodding does when a person has run out of things to say and has not yet decided what to do next. Then, with the small, unhappy expression of a man who had been raised on procedure and now found procedure on the wrong side of his instinct, he stood up and asked her to wait in the lobby for 10 minutes while he made a quick call. The quick call was not quick. The quick call was to the watch officer at the inner gate, instructing that the visitor pass issued to Delilah Ashbrook be flagged pending verification, and that she be politely directed to the Visitor Control Center if she attempted to re-enter the base proper that day. He used the phrase, by the book. He used the phrase, out of an abundance of caution. He believed both phrases when he said them. By the time he hung up the desk phone, Delilah was no longer in the lobby. She had read the clock at 10:57, decided she was not waiting any longer for a meeting that had ended without anyone closing it, and walked out the front door of the annex with the folder still under her arm. She had 11 minutes to figure out that her pass had been flagged. She had 9 before she got to the inner gate. She had 7 before she met Foster. Quick favor before this story gets to the part you came here for. If it has hooked you, drop a like and subscribe. It is the single thing that keeps stories like this getting told. Because what just left Anderson's office line is about to put a woman in a navy blazer 1 pace away from a man who has been waiting at a gate for 19 minutes specifically for her. The walk from the visitor lot to the inner gate was 400 yards along a wide concrete sidewalk lined on one side by Bradford pear trees and on the other by a chain-link fence with a navy blue privacy slat. Joggers passed her, 2 by 2, in the bike lane. A delivery truck rolled by at low speed, the driver lifting 2 fingers from the wheel in the small understated wave that base traffic does. The sun was high enough by now to throw shadows that were short and harsh. Delilah did not look at her phone or check a lanyard pass. She had felt the meeting end before Anderson had ended it,
and she was already moving along the next several steps of the day in her head, the way she had been trained to move along several steps at once when one of them stopped behaving. The folder under her arm was about 3/4 of an inch thick. It contained a redacted operations summary from 2023, signed by an officer whose name was blacked out and whose signature block was also blacked out. A single page of the citation packet for an award that had been read at a small private ceremony in a base auditorium 2 years ago. A printed copy of her current orders with her billet listed on the 3rd line, and a laminated identification card paper-clipped to the inside back cover that she had not had reason to display in 3 days. She did not intend to display it now. She had not flown across the country to win an argument. She had flown to bury a man who had been, on his worst day, more steady than most of the people in the community center had been on their best. She reached the inner gate at 11:01. The guard shack was small, white, with a single open window facing the approach. A speaker on a pole repeated the access advisory in its low, patient loop. 2 security personnel stood inside, a younger seaman who looked up at her and then looked back down at his clipboard, and Petty Officer First Class Bradley Foster, who was already watching her before she was within 10 yards of the window. He had received the call from Anderson 19 minutes earlier. He had been waiting. He stepped out of the shack with the easy roll of a man whose chest is bigger than his stride. He positioned himself 1 pace inside the painted line that marked the boundary of the controlled zone. He smiled the smile of someone who had been given permission. Then he said the line that opened this whole story. He said it the way he had practiced it in his head while he waited. He said it loud enough that the seaman in the shack heard it and decided to find something on the clipboard worth staring at. "Hand it over, sweetheart. The folder. Slow. I've heard every story that's ever tried to walk through this gate, and yours has about 30 seconds left to be interesting."
The folder stayed under her arm. She held the line, no advance, no retreat. She stood with her weight slightly forward over the balls of her feet, the lanyard pass in plain view at her lower lapel, and she said in a voice that did not rise above the volume of his that her visitor access had been confirmed by the Visitor Control Center at 6:30 that morning and that her pass had not been formally revoked. She said she would be happy to speak with the watch officer if he had concerns. She used the word concerns. It was a generous word, and Foster heard the generosity in it the way a man hears a door close. "Pass got pulled, sweetheart. JAG flagged it. So we are going to do this the easy way, which is you hand me that folder, you hand me your wallet, you stand against the fence, and we sort it out at our pace, or we do it the other way." A jogger slowed across the road, then sped back up. She said, still even, that Base Instruction 5530.14 required notification to the pass holder before revocation, and that no such notification had been issued to her phone or her email. She said the lanyard pass, currently visible, was the same pass the Visitor Control Center had issued 5 hours earlier. She said she would surrender the pass at the Visitor Control Center voluntarily if a watch officer would walk her there. She did not surrender it to him. She did not need to. Foster's smile thinned. He stepped closer, half astride, just enough to crowd the line. He said in a lower register that she could either cooperate or be made to cooperate, and he reached casually, the way a man reaches for a door handle, for the folder under her right arm. She turned her shoulder 1/4 of an inch, not a flinch, a redirect. His hand closed on the corner of the folder and slid off it, and then settled on her forearm above the wrist. She stepped out of the grip without stepping back, the way a person steps out of a doorway someone else is trying to walk through. Her hand stayed open. She did not return the contact. She let the empty air do the work. She said then 3 things in order, and she said them at the volume of a person ordering food at a counter.
She said that under Article 91 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, his current conduct, the unauthorized physical contact, was actionable. She said that under Article 92, the failure to follow Base Instruction 5530.14 regarding notice prior to revocation was also actionable. She said that both articles applied to him in this moment, not to her. She said all of it without raising her voice. She said all of it without taking her eyes off his face. The younger seaman inside the shack stopped pretending to look at the clipboard. A car had stopped on the access road behind her. 2 more had stopped behind that one. Someone in the second car raised a phone, then lowered it, then raised it again. The advisory loop on the speaker continued its low, patient cycle. Foster did not let go of her wrist immediately. He let go at his own pace, 2 seconds later, which is the exact length of time it takes a man to decide that he has just made a mistake but does not want to be seen making the decision in real time. He took half a step back. He recovered the smile. He said in a voice that was now performing the role of in control that she could explain herself to the watch officer. He said the watch officer would settle it. Behind her, on the access road, a black sedan rolled to a stop. A door opened. Retired Vice Admiral Raymond Kingsley got out. He had been summoned by text by Charlotte Frazier 4 minutes earlier. He had been told there was a situation at the gate involving the woman from the reception. He had come, in his own words on the drive over, to put this thing to bed. He was about to put nothing to bed. He was about to look for the first time since the previous morning at Delilah Ashbrook's right wrist, where the cuff of the blazer had ridden up during the half-step shoulder turn, and where, on the inside of the forearm above the radial pulse, 3 small black dots sat at the points of a precise triangle above a printed line of small letters and a number. He did not see the dots yet. He saw her face first. He started across the asphalt with the loose, authoritative walk of a man preparing to be useful.
He stopped about 6 feet from her. He said her name, the way people say a name when they want to be heard saying it. He told Foster, without looking at Foster, that he had this. Foster said, without conviction, "Sir." The Admiral turned back to Delilah. He began to say something about how unfortunate it was that the morning had taken this turn. He used the phrase, blown out of proportion. He gestured lightly with his right hand. Her right hand was at her side, the folder tucked back fully under her arm, the wrist relaxed. The cuff of the blazer had ridden up perhaps 1.5 inches during the moment with Foster. She had not corrected it. She did not correct it now. He was looking at her face, and then, in the small, involuntary way that the eyes of an experienced man move when something flickers at the edge of his peripheral, he looked down. 3 dots, black, small, set at the points of an isosceles triangle the size of a dime. Beneath them, and a tight, precise serif, a line of letters and a number that read NSWSC 03. He did not finish the sentence he had started. The sentence stopped mid-clause. He blinked once. He glanced back up at her face, then back down at the wrist, then up again. His mouth was slightly open. He closed it. He turned, slowly, to Foster. He said, very quietly, without any of the loose, authoritative cadence he had walked over with, "Stand down, now." Foster, who had spent the last 40 seconds trying to recover his footing, said, "Sir, the JAG flagged the—" "Stand down." The seaman in the shack stood up. A breeze moved across the access road. The advisory loop on the speaker began its cycle again. The car with the phone in the second window had not lowered the phone. The Admiral did not look at her wrist a 3rd time. He did not need to. He looked at her face, and he held the look for a count of 3. Then he said, in the voice of a man who had just understood all at once the actual shape of his mourning, that he owed her an apology, that he would prefer to deliver it somewhere other than the side of a road, and would she walk with him to the watch office. She did not walk with him to the watch office. She said evenly that she would speak with the watch officer, that she would surrender the lanyard pass at the visitor control center as previously offered, and that any apology owed to her could be delivered at his convenience through the proper channel. She used the phrase proper channel without irony. He took it without flinching. He nodded once. He stepped back. She walked past him toward the shack, the folder still under her arm, the cuff of the blazer still riding up 1.5 inches on the right wrist. She did not pull the cuff down. She had decided somewhere in the last 10 seconds that it was not going to be pulled down for the rest of the day. Inside the second stopped car, the phone that had been raised was still recording. The driver would later upload the footage to a closed page that he believed was private and that by the end of the week would not be. The footage would not show the wrist clearly. It would show Kingsley's face. It would, in particular, show the half-second between the look down and the look up. People who knew what they were looking at would replay that half-second more than any other half-second of the clip. In the visitor control center, 4 minutes later, Delilah surrendered the lanyard pass. The petty officer behind the glass apologized for the inconvenience and printed her a new one without a flag. She accepted it without comment. She walked back to the rental car. She sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before she started the engine. She put both hands on the wheel. She breathed in for 4, out for 6, 2 cycles. Then she opened the folder for the first time that day. She read the top page once. She read it again. She closed the folder. She started the car. Across town, in his small office at the JAG Annex, Lieutenant Commander Derek Anderson received an internal email that began with the phrase, "Re-gate incident this morning." He read the first sentence twice. He set the cup that said "Procedure first" down on the desk with more care than usual. He did not pick it back up for some time. And in a cluttered conference room 2 floors above him, NCIS Special Agent Audrey Forrester opened a new case folder, wrote the date at the top of the first page, and underlined the file number twice. If you have made it this far, like, subscribe, and stay through to the end of this story. The folder under Delilah Ashbrook's arm has been waiting 18 months to be read out loud, and it is about to be.
She came in hot at that gate, refused lawful instruction, hand on the folder, hand on the wallet. I told her to stand against the fence. She put hands on me. I'm filing on her, officially. Petty Officer First Class Bradley Foster was sitting in the small interview room off the security office 2 days after the gate, the union counsel across from him with a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee gone cold. Foster had practiced his version on the drive over and again in the parking lot. He delivered it twice for the counsel, and then asked with what he believed was professional concern when the formal complaint would be filed against Ashbrook. The counsel, who had been doing this work for 16 years and could read a client overselling from across a parking lot, said the complaint would be filed when the body cam from Foster's vest had been reviewed. The body cam was sitting in an evidence bag on the desk between them. Foster looked at the bag, looked at the counsel. He said, in a tone that was now slightly less confident, that the body cam might not show the whole picture, that the angle had been bad, that she had moved quickly. He said the phrase, "she moved quickly," twice. The counsel wrote it down once, then drew a small line through it, then wrote in smaller handwriting the words "second copy." Foster did not see that part of the page. The counsel asked, in a voice that had thinned by several degrees over the previous 10 minutes, whether Foster had reviewed the body cam himself before drafting his initial written statement. Foster said he had not. The counsel asked whether anyone else from his shop had advised him on the contents of the body cam before he had signed the statement. Foster said no one had. The counsel did not ask a third question. The counsel set the pen down on the legal pad and looked at the bag on the desk and then at Foster, and Foster, in the small, private way that a man understands he has miscalculated, understood that he had miscalculated. 2 floors above the security office, in the NCIS Field Annex, Special Agent Audrey Forrester had already requested the second copy. The first request had been routed at 6 p.m. the night of the gate. The download had completed at 6:18. By the time Foster was telling his counsel that the angle had been bad, Forrester had watched the relevant 90 seconds 4 times. She had the still images printed and laid in a row across the long table by the window. She did not look at the images while she ate her sandwich at her desk. She had been doing this work for 21 years. She knew which evidence to read with lunch and which to read without it. This one was without. What sat on her desk beside the sandwich she would not finish was a stack built over the previous 36 hours. On the top, a printout of the anonymous tip filed through the Navy Ombudsman intake portal, with the device identifier field still populated because Connor Royd had never signed out of his work device the night he had submitted it. Underneath that, the inner gate log, time-stamped 11:01 a.m., with the watch officer's chop in the margin. Underneath that, a redacted operations summary from 2023 that Forrester had pulled not from any open source, but from a separate channel she did not put on the cover sheet. The operations summary did not name the supporting officer attached to the team. The name was blacked out. The award packet was not. Forrester opened the award packet to the citation paragraph and read it aloud to herself, low and even, the way she always did when she wanted to be sure she understood what she was holding. For meritorious service in connection with combat operations as a senior enlisted advisor and primary precision rifle qualified element of the assigned detachment, the candidate's actions undertaken with exceptional skill and personal courage under sustained hostile fire were directly responsible for the preservation of friendly forces and the successful accomplishment of mission objectives. She read it twice. She set the packet down. She picked up the phone. Quick favor before the next part. If this story has been worth your time so far, hit like and subscribe before it goes any further. It is the cheapest thing you can do, and it matters more than you would think.
The base community closed ranks. By the second evening, Delilah had been quietly asked to delay her return flight pending the inquiry. She had moved out of the chain hotel 2 blocks off Atlantic Avenue and into a smaller motel 4 miles inland, partly because the chain hotel was where Charlotte Fraser was staying, and partly because she preferred, in moments like this one, to be in a room with one window facing a parking lot and one door facing the same parking lot, and no second exit she had not personally checked. She spent that night reading Mason Albert's letters. There were not many of them, 5 envelopes, the earliest from 2019, when he had been deployed without her and had written in the cramped, careful hand of a man who treated paper as scarce. The latest from the spring of 2023, 3 months before the operation that the redacted summary on Forrester's desk would never name in print, in which Mason had used the word friend exactly 4 times across 6 pages and the word Master Chief twice, and had signed off with 2 letters and a comma and his first name without flourish. Outside, the rain came in at an angle for about 20 minutes and then stopped. Her phone vibrated once on the nightstand, a missed call from a Virginia Beach number she recognized but did not return immediately. The voicemail it left ran 43 seconds. The voice on the recording was rough, mid-60s, a man who had clearly recorded the message after deciding not to record it at least once. He did not identify himself by service. He identified himself by the way he said her rank. Master Chief, he said, twice, the second time gentler than the first. He said he had something to say in person if she would let him, and that he would be at the small parking lot off Beach Road at 7 a.m., and that he would wait the hour and leave if she did not come and would not bother her again. She listened to the voicemail twice. She set the phone down. She did not call back, and she did not delete it. She put it on the nightstand, face up, beside the closed manila folder, and she lay on her back on the motel comforter without taking the blazer off, and she watched the slow shadow of a passing truck travel across the ceiling and out the other side. She did not go to the small parking lot at 7 a.m. She slept until 5:40 without an alarm, and she drove to the JAG Annex. The Administrative Review Board convened in a conference room at the JAG Annex at 09:30 on Tuesday. It was not a court-martial.
It was the procedural mechanism by which an NCIS preliminary investigation could be entered onto the record with relevant parties present and decisions about referral, discipline, and policy taken on the same record. The chair was a senior captain from the Staff Judge Advocate's office. 2 flag-level observers sat to her left. Forrester sat to her right with a binder in her lap that was thicker than it had any right to be. Delilah was seated at the participants' table in a plain charcoal suit, the cuff of the jacket now sitting where it normally sat on her right wrist. She had not displayed the ink since the gate. She had not needed to. The board had her service jacket. The board had the award packet. The board had the body cam. The board had Forrester's binder. The board did not need a wrist. Across the table, Lieutenant Commander Anderson sat with his hands flat on the surface and a small line between his eyebrows. Connor Royd had been ordered to attend and had brought, against his counsel's advice, a yellow legal pad of his own, on which he had written the words, "I had reason to believe," and then nothing else. Foster had been ordered to attend and was visibly attempting to occupy as little of his chair as possible. Forrester read the receipts onto the record in the order she had laid them across her table. The anonymous tip, with the device identifier matched to Royd's work device, time-stamped 11:07 on the Saturday evening, less than 30 minutes after the reception had ended. Royd's counsel objected to the chain of custody on the device match. Forrester provided the chain of custody. The objection was overruled. The chair noted on the record the potential exposure under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001, for false statements within a federal proceeding, and under Article 107, false official statement. Royd's pen stopped moving. The inner gate log was read next, line by line, with the watch officer's annotation read in full. The body cam clip was played. It was not played twice. It did not need to be. The room was quiet for the 7 seconds in which the audio carried Foster's first sentence at the gate, and quieter for the 4 seconds in which his hand was visibly on Delilah's forearm above the wrist. The chair asked Foster if he wished to amend any portion of his prior written statement. Foster, in the careful, smaller voice of a man whose union counsel had finally caught his eye across the room, said he wished to amend it. The chair noted on the record the potential exposure under Article 107 for the original statement and under Article 133, depending on findings. Then Forrester read the service jacket. She read it the way she had read the citation paragraph at her desk the day before. Slow, level, without color. Master Chief Petty Officer Delilah Ashbrook, United States Navy. Pay grade E9. Graduate Naval Special Warfare Sniper Course, Class Designator 03. 4 operational deployments attached to Group 2 between 1919 and 2023. Award of the Bronze Star with Valor device for actions described in the citation now entered at Exhibit 4. The room did not gasp. Rooms like that one rarely do. What happens instead is that the air in them changes pressure slightly, the same way it changes when an aircraft levels off, and people who have been sitting forward sit back a quarter of an inch without knowing they have done it. Anderson's hands came together at the knuckles on the table. Royd looked at his legal pad. Foster looked at the floor. The chair turned to Anderson. She asked whether he wished to enter any statement regarding his order the previous Sunday morning to flag the Master Chief's visitor pass at the inner gate. Anderson stood. He spoke for less than a minute. He said he had acted on what he had believed to be a procedurally sufficient basis for caution, that he understood, in light of the evidence now on the record, that the basis had not, in fact, been procedurally sufficient, and that he accepted responsibility for the cascade of events that had followed his call to the watch officer. He did not blame Royd's filing. He did not blame the rumor. He said the call was his to make and that he had made it wrong. He sat back down. The chair noted the statement on the record and did not respond to it. The chair turned to Vice Admiral Kingsley, who had been present as a retired flag officer at the board's request and had not yet been asked to speak. He asked if he wished to enter any statement onto the record. He said he did. He said it briefly. He said he had spoken to the Master Chief in a manner unbecoming of his prior office, that he had compounded the error by attempting to intervene at the gate without facts, and that he was on the record as offering his apology in the present forum because he understood it would not be appropriate in any other. He did not editorialize. He did not ask for an off-the-record minute. He was not granted one. The chair thanked the parties and recessed the board for findings. Findings would be issued in writing within 30 days, the standard window. Much of what would eventually be issued had already, by then, been decided.
6 months later, the file read like this. Chief Petty Officer Connor Royd referred to NCIS for prosecution under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001, False Statements, and under Article 107 of the Uniform Code, False Official Statement. Case pending. Most cases like Royd's settle before trial. His counsel had filed the appearance for plea discussions by the 3rd month. Petty Officer First Class Bradley Foster, non-judicial punishment imposed under Article 15, reduction in rank, forfeiture of half a month's pay for 2 months, 45 days restriction, permanent annotation in his service record, reassignment off the inner gate roster. Lieutenant Commander Derek Anderson, written letter of caution from the Staff Judge Advocate, retained in his official record for the remainder of his current tour, mandatory retraining on visitor access procedures, no referral, no reduction, a career bent rather than broken, which was what a letter of caution was usually designed to do, and which Anderson understood the same way a man understands a diagnosis of a condition he will live with but never quite finish managing. Charlotte Frazier, no formal action. There was no formal action available to be taken. Senior officers' spouses do not appear on duty rosters. The base community simply made certain decisions about which group texts she was on and which volunteer committees she chaired, and within 4 months her name had drifted off the active rotation in the quiet manner that names drift in such communities. She drafted a private letter of apology in the 3rd month and did not send it. It was found later in a drawer of a desk she was clearing out by a woman who had once been on the receiving end of the laughter at the reception and who took some small private satisfaction in being the one who threw it away. Vice Admiral Raymond Kingsley, retired, no formal action available. Retired flag officers sit beyond the reach of the disciplinary mechanisms that govern those still serving. His on-the-record statement at the board became, by the 4th month, a small paragraph in a service journal article about command climate, attributed only as remarks by a senior official. The paragraph did not name Delilah. The journal's editorial board had been careful about that at her request, transmitted through counsel. The base announced a review of its visitor verification policy. The review was scheduled to conclude within 90 days. At the end of 90 days, it issued a memorandum recommended revised procedures pending budget approval. Enforcement timelines, in the language the memorandum used, would be determined as resources permitted. Anyone who had worked on a base long enough to read a memorandum knew what that meant. It meant the next time a woman in a plain blazer arrived at the inner gate without the right kind of shoulders, the policy would already be in place on paper, and what happened next would still depend entirely on who was inside the shack.
There was a small second memorial 6 months after the first in the parking lot off Beach Road, attended by 12 people in civilian clothes. Senior Chief Silas Arden was one of them. He stood at the back because that was where he stood at memorials. Delilah walked over to him after the brief reading, and without speaking, she pinned a small worn coin to the lapel of his civilian jacket. The coin had been Mason Albert's. She had been carrying it in the inside pocket of the Navy blazer since the morning of the first reception. Arden looked down at the coin, then up at her, then down at the coin again. He said, "Master Chief," very quietly, the way the voicemail had said it the night she had not picked up. She nodded once. She did not say anything back. They stood together for a minute and a half, looking at the ground at the edge of the lot, where the grass had not yet recovered from the winter. Mason's mother was there. She had flown in from Spokane on her own, paid for the ticket herself, refused the offered ride, and walked from the bus stop. She did not know who Delilah was in the official sense. She knew only that the woman in the charcoal coat had served with her son, and that her son, in the last letter he had written home, used the phrase, "She will get me through this," twice in one paragraph about a person he could not name. When the brief reading ended, Mason's mother walked over to Delilah, and she did not ask any questions. She took Delilah's hands in both of her own and held them for a count of about 10 and let them go. They did not exchange names. They did not need to. She flew out of Norfolk that evening. She did not return for the second board hearing scheduled for the following spring. She did not need to.
What remained in the file Forrester closed on a Friday in November were two things that did not have findings beside them. The first was a single redacted name in the operations summary from 2023. The name had been blacked out at original classification, and it remained blacked out in the public file. It would remain blacked out in any file that ever reached anyone outside the small set of people who already knew it. The second was a voicemail. Senior Chief Arden had left it on a Sunday night 6 months earlier. Delilah had not returned it then, and she had not returned it in the months since. The recording sat on a server somewhere, neither deleted nor played again. Both of them, in their separate places, had agreed, without ever saying so, that some calls do not need to be returned in order to have been answered. Forrester signed the file folder closed at 4:15 on the Friday afternoon. She stood up. She walked across the room to refill her coffee. On her way back to her desk, she stopped, the same way she sometimes stopped, in front of the long table by the window, where one printout from the inner gate camera log still sat under a paperweight she had not yet moved. The log showed an unaccounted gap, 10 minutes on the night Connor Royd had filed the anonymous tip. 10 minutes during which the inner gate camera had recorded nothing, and during which the supervisor's badge swipe had not been logged, and during which a maintenance ticket had been opened and closed in the system without an accompanying technician name. Forrester looked at the printout for a long time. She did not reopen the case. The case was closed. Findings had been entered. Parties had been disciplined. The policy review had been initiated. The case was, by every available measure, complete. She also did not forget the 10 minutes. She walked back to her desk, sat down, opened a new page in the back of her own personal notebook, and wrote in small, careful handwriting a single line containing a date, a time range, and 3 letters of someone's last name with a question mark behind them. She closed the notebook. She finished her coffee. She went home. If this story moved you, like it, share it, and subscribe before you scroll on. The 10 minutes Forrester wrote down in her notebook are still missing, and somewhere in the file room of a Virginia naval base, a folder marked closed has not finished being read.